A little overview of how we're going to spend our time today. We're going to talk about the purpose of Title I Part A, the intersection of Title I Part A with McKinney-Vento, requirements and reservation, determining funds, allowable uses, reporting and evaluating, and then we have some frequently asked questions at the end for everyone. And we'll go ahead and reintroduce ourselves. My name is Susie Terry. I am the coordinator for homeless education at the San Diego County Office of Education and also one of three homeless education technical assistance centers for California.
And I'm Carmina Barrales. I'm one of three education programs consultants here at the California Department of Education Homeless Education Program.
And before we get started today, much of what we're going to talk about today, you can also find in our new resource from the HETAC, 4 tip sheets centered around Title I Part A and McKinney-Vento that sort of work together. Um, there's a serving students experiencing homelessness under Title I Part A, which is sort of the foundational tip sheet. And then there's 3 companion tip sheets, including allowable and strategic uses, making the case for partnership, and some cross-partnership program strategies. And you can find those on the HETAC website. You may have also received them via email. And they will be accessible in the slides for today's training once they're posted on the website.
And Susie, I just added it to the chat too.
Oh, and they're in the
But
chat.
no peeking. You guys are supposed to be paying attention, but now you have them. So today, as Susie's sharing, her and I are partnering for the an overview of Title I Part A, the reservation requirements, uses, all the ways that Title I Part A supports and should be used in partnership in serving our students who are experiencing homelessness. In our next slide, I'll go over a little bit of some of the acronyms that you may or may not be familiar with. We just want to make sure that everybody's using the same alphabet soup as we go through all of our different information. So CARS is our consolidated application reporting system here for California that that all of your schools use, specifically if you do receive the Title I funds. ESSA, ES, no, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the ESEA. Free and reduced price meal count is the FRPM. So that could be, formerly like low income or some of your students who are unduplicated. HETACs, as Susie shared before, are homeless education technical assistance centers that's unique to California and support the California Department of Education. Local educational agencies, I know in regular education terms, that's usually a district, but we will also use LEA as a term that will include county offices and charter schools as well. An SEA is the California Department of Education, which is a state educational agency. And anytime we refer to federal education code, it will be under USC, under United States Code. And on the next slide, we'll just jump right into kind of a high level overview of Title I Part A. The purpose of Title I Part A is to provide all children with a fair, equitable, and high quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. That includes supporting schools in implementing these goals. And the Title I Part A program provides supplemental funds to LEAs and schools with high numbers and percentages of children from low income families. And the next slide. Continuing with some of this federal language, Title I, Part A is designed to meet the educational needs of low achieving children in schools with the highest level of poverty by aligning the high quality assessments, systems of accountability, teacher preparation, curriculum, and instructional materials with challenging state academic standards. So in the next slide, we'll go into now what homeless education is. It is part of a federal definition known as McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. Here on after, we will refer to it as the McKinney-Vento Act or the Act. And that act ensures that children who are experiencing homelessness have access to the same free, appropriate public education, including public preschool education and related services to their permanently housed peers, so that they, as students who are experiencing homelessness, have the same and equal opportunity to meet the same challenging academic standards as their peers. In the next couple of bullets, these are some of the requirements for both SEAs. If you remember, that would be like CDE, the California Department of Education. So it's a state agency, as well as county offices, districts, and charters. It's our role to ensure that we are removing barriers to the identification, enrollment, attendance, and success in school of our students who are experiencing homelessness. The McKinney-Vento Act also emphasizes collaboration and parent participation. That is, we all know, is critical to educational success of students, especially our students experiencing homelessness. And in that last bullet, you'll see that both McKinney-Vento and Title I Part A align a lot regarding the academic achievement and success of these students. And so the requirements for coordination between the two programs are included in both statutes. So both McKinney-Vento Act and Title I Part A require coordination in order to support our students. In the next slide, it's digging deeper. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Susie. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I thought about just
Like
letting
on a roll.
I know.
Sorry.
So this next section is with regard to Title I Part A and homeless. Children and youth experiencing homelessness are automatically eligible for Title I Part A services, whether or not they meet the academic standards required of other students for eligibility, or whether or not they live in a Title I Part A school attendance area. So students experiencing homelessness may be served in a Title I Part A school-wide programs, in targeted assistance programs, using Title I Part A funds that must be reserved for students experiencing homelessness. And then in that last bullet, you'll see those reservation funds usage. Those services may be greater in scope and intensity or different in nature than those normally provided to non-homeless students. This flexibility in reservation really just acknowledges that students experiencing homelessness may face unique educational challenges and barriers beyond what is experienced by students from low-income families who are stably housed. Next slide. So LEAs are required to reserve a portion of their Title I Part A allocation specifically for meeting the needs of children and youth experiencing homelessness. And those funds can be used to fund the homeless liaison position and or to fund school of origin transportation. We're going to talk more coming up about use of funds, more allowable use of funds. And also, just for everyone's sort of FYI, these funds are often referred to as the homeless set aside funds, reservation or reservation funds for homeless education, There are a bunch of different phrases used locally um, that all refer to the Part A set aside or reservation. I don't even, I go back and forth myself. Next slide. So LEAs must conduct um, timely and meaningful consultation with the liaison and the Title I coordinator. Um, they must describe how their Title I Part A program is coordinated with their homeless education program. Um, and describe how the Title I Part A services that will be provided to students experiencing homelessness to support their school enrollment, attendance, and success will be used. So, the reporting of this planning is done through the CDE CARS, which is the Consolidated Application Reporting System. I don't know if that was on the acronym slide. Um, but the CARS is a two-part application and reporting process for multiple state and federal program funds, including Title I Part A reservation for homeless funds. Next slide. So collaboration between the two programs, effective coordination between the programs, given that there are requirements in both to serve homeless children and youth, can have substantive impacts on many homeless students. So we're going to go through a couple of recommendations for facilitating stronger collaboration or strong collaboration. Um, the first, encourage your local Title I coordinators and local liaisons to work together to develop and implement a plan that identifies the way that Title I funds and programs will serve your children and youth experiencing homelessness. There's a lot of encouragement in a lot of the resources around Title I Part A that and in statute that really encourages the Title I coordinator and the local liaison to work together to develop that plan. I know in my county, I still receive a lot of questions from liaisons about this. It's not always happening as much as we would like. So this is just your reminder to, if you're in this webinar today and you're a liaison, to like seek out your Title I coordinator and start having those conversations. Next slide. Any Title I plans, um, school improvement plans, LEA level plans should address highly mobile students, such as students experiencing homelessness, inclusively and not as a separate issue. Make sure you're including your students experiencing homelessness in any of the plans being created at a local level. Um, Provide joint Title I Part A and McKinney-Vento program trainings, meetings, materials for staff. Those materials could include the brand new HETAC resources that we just disseminated. You can use those to educate folks on in either program about the other. Share your Title I, Part A, and homeless education resources, handbooks relating to serving students experiencing high poverty and mobility with program staff. Essentially, like the recommendations here are to make sure that both programs are being educated and learning about each other and how the two can work together in support of students. Next slide. Um, Establish and disseminate policies and procedures for identification and services to students who are homeless. Use data from a variety of sources, including homeless data reported to the Department of Ed and other sources, dashboard data, DataQuest, um, to determine appropriate homeless set-aside funding levels and activities. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about determining the set-aside coming up, but you should be using your data um, to look at, have your numbers gone up? Have they gone down? Um, how much are we spending on which interventions in order to have those conversations, those productive conversations about what the planning will be for the next year, and share data within and across the LEA, including the needs of homeless children and youth to build awareness and understanding among the staff. Next slide. And then lead district-wide efforts to make organizational accommodations for eligible students as necessary in areas such as transportation, remaining in the school of origin, records transfer, class scheduling, special services that will help them enroll, attend, and succeed in school. This is very much around that removal of barriers. And then building these cross-program partnerships can provide greater collective impact for students and allow the LEA to respond to the needs of students more effectively. When the programs are working together, the impact is greater. And I think the next slide, I give it back to you, Carmina.
Right. So we already had a couple questions about how to determine the set aside. And if you notice the kind of high level message from Susie's last slides is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. It is so important that when an LEA is determining this reservation amount, that the homeless liaison be a part of that. If it's an additional help, this is part of the FPM risk assessment. When we look at programs, how much is being reserved, what it's being used for, how does that compare with your EHCY grant if you receive that grant. So in order to determine an appropriate set aside amount, that requires, as you'll see in that first bullet, coordination between the Title I Part A, whether it's a director or coordinator, and the McKinney-Vento program lead. So whether that's your homeless education coordinator or a liaison, whatever title that is. The set aside must be determined based on the total Title I Part A allocation received by the LEA and reserved prior to any allowable expenditures or transfers. So it's not an afterthought. This is part of the initial planning when you're looking at your whole scope of how much you're receiving as a district. LEA should establish their own methods for determining their homeless set aside while working with various stakeholders within the LEA as appropriate. So if you're receiving EHCY funds, actually, we'll just go on to the next slide. When determining the set aside amount, the Title I director and local liaison should partner to gather and review relevant data in order to ensure that the sufficient Title I funds are reserved to meet the needs of these students. And as a reminder, when you are determining that set aside amount, LEAs should allow for the provision of services to meet the unique needs of homeless students who attend Title I Part A schools that are above and beyond the services provided through their regular Title I-A programs. So part of that, what we're saying is that when you're talking about that reservation amount and what you're providing to this particular group of students that you're serving, it's going to look different than the services and types of needs that you have for your Title I students. And that's why the allowable uses look different. So making sure that everybody's on the same page. Sometimes our fiscal teams and staff want to protect kind of what we're doing and making sure that that's an allowable use or not. And so making sure that everybody's on the same page of what is allowable for this particular reservation. Um, on the next slide, we'll go into more detail about possible methods for calculating this reservation amount. So one way is to base the set aside on a needs assessment. You are asked to do a needs assessment if you're an EHCY grant as part of the application. So it's important to include that even now. Um, so using, like we mentioned in the other slides, data, asking questions about maybe if you have on-site liaisons within your district, considering both the number and the needs of these students. So how many students have you identified as homeless? Has that increased? Then your set aside should increase. If it's been lowered, then maybe it stays the same because it's what's helping staff ensure that these services are being prioritized for these students. In that second bullet, we talk about a percentage. So there's not really a formula or a minimum, but you could say a certain percentage of your Title I funds is reserved for that homeless set aside. So that when your Title I Part A funds allocation increases, so does your reservation amount for these students. And in that last bullet, you could multiply the number of students experiencing homelessness that are identified by the district by the Title I Part A pupil per pupil allocation. So if you already as a district have a Title I Part A pupil per pupil allocation, using that as an added multiplication to the number of students that are identified as homeless. In the next slide, you could also match your McKinney-Vento EHCY grant. So if you are a grantee, then having a match is also an important part of continuing the work that you're doing for these McKinney-Vento students identified and your program as a whole. Another one is to adjust a previous set aside amounts based on past set aside expenditures and trend data. So maybe you always reserved a particular amount, and then suddenly your bus system or your transportation changes, and so you're going to have to adjust for that change. Maybe you experienced a natural disaster in your community, and so you have more displaced students. And if that seems to be happening more and more regularly, then it's important to adjust your set aside amount based on something that has already happened and that may happen again, to help with that. On this last bullet, I'm going to do my best to explain this because I always mush it up. But you take your free and reduced price meal count data, that number, and compare it to your homeless enrollment. LEAs should find that the number of FRPM students and the number of identified homeless students should fall between that 5 to 10%. If you fall under that 5%, you are probably under identifying. And so you should be reserving an amount to be helping you identify those students. So that could be going back to like what Susie was saying about investing in the position of the homeless liaison. Maybe they need additional support. Maybe there's data support that needs to happen. If you're over identifying, making sure that there's more boots on the ground, following up in your SIS systems to identify these students. In the next slide, there is this additional note regarding changing set aside. So if the number of students experiencing homelessness in your LEA changes significantly over the course of the school year, LEAs can make changes to both fiscal and program. But please note that these changes should be based on emerging needs of homeless children and youth and families. And samples of changes could be larger, bigger kinds of things. So natural disasters, the pandemic, those kinds of things. In the next couple of slides, we'll go over the uses of funds. So again, remember earlier I was saying when you have your conversations between your Title I director or staff lead and your homeless liaison, making sure that your fiscal team also fully understands these allowable uses. These may differ greatly from general uses of funds or regular Title I uses. So items of clothing, especially if there's a uniform or a dress code requirement for enrolling in school, we want to make sure students are set up for success starting on that first day. PE clothes, caps and gowns for graduation participation, immunization, medical or dental services, such as hearing aids, eyeglasses, all of those things. And that includes transportation to the appointment, the services themselves, any type of like hearing aids or glasses or fees that you have to pay for receiving those for their academic success. In the next slide, we'll continue with some of the uses of funds. So any kind of student fees that are necessary to participate in general education programs. So class projects, field trips, where everybody else is attending these events and it's an important part of the child's education. Personal school supplies such as backpacks and notebooks. I know that's a big one for our school districts and to be able to support students. Birth certificates. So those type or any other types of forms that are necessary for school enrollment. Food that is consumed during the school day. That is for sure probably not on that Title I general uses of funds. So, but it is important for our students experiencing homelessness. Support of the homeless liaison position. Now, notice that on this bullet, it doesn't say the homeless liaison position, but it includes support for the position. So this could be, as I said earlier, a data person that works with the liaison. Maybe there's two people if it's a much larger school district. And so, or, you know, there's the boots on the ground, leading trainings position or a support staff for the homeless liaison. And then collecting data on children and youth. I think that might be a typo, but I think it's like the data position. So making sure that there's data that is required to be reported so that there's ways of supporting that part. We'll continue with the uses of funds on the next slide. Transportation, this is probably the largest Title I Part A expenditure for our LEAs. Please note that this is transportation to and from the school of origin. Counseling services that will support the students' academic success. So any like related to anxiety or any other services that might help. Outreach services. So we're talking about boots on the ground staff, reaching out to students and families who are living in shelters, motels, or other types of temporary residences. And extended learning time. This could be before and after school programs, Saturday classes, some of your summer programs for students that will help compensate for that lack of quiet time for homework in shelters or other overcrowded living conditions. Even motels and hotels where there's not a reliable like little corner for students to complete homework assignments and have that success. We have another slide on the uses of funds, and this continues. So tutoring services, again, especially in shelters and locations where some of our students who are experiencing homelessness live. Parental involvement, specifically oriented to reaching out to parents of homeless students. So this doesn't mean activities or parent involvement or engagement just for these parents, but enhancing current activities that are parent engagement, family engagement, but making sure that the parents of our students experiencing homelessness understand that they are also part of this gathering, this informational, that there's an added reach out to this particular group of parents. And the last bullet on this slide is the fees associated with things like GED tests or advanced placement testings or anything that's going to help continue that education for our students experiencing homelessness. And that last slide, there is a one pager that has this full list, including the requirement on like a handy one page. And there's the link for that. I can add it to the chat as well. But this resource includes federal and state citations for these requirements. So if you are having that discussion with your fiscal team or your Title I director and they're not fully understanding this requirement, you'll notice on that resource that it talks about responsibilities of the LEA surrounding serving these students who are experiencing homelessness. So it's not the roles and responsibilities of the liaison, but the whole district. And then of course, the allowable uses that I just went through on these slides. As with any uses of funds, there on this next slide, we do talk about prohibited uses of funds. Title I Part A funds cannot be used for rental assistance for homeless families. It's not a clothing assistance for parents or guardians of the students. Title I reservation funds are not to be used for the cost of prom dresses, sports, or yearbooks, or physical exams to participate in sports. This is all federally outlined. So in the next slide, and maybe I should pause for a second. Do we have any questions about some of the stuff that I just shared? Okay, so I think we can address a little bit more of those. I think you answered some of them, Susie. So now that we've talked about the coordination, collaboration regarding this reservation amount and understanding it and how to determine the reservation amount, the different allowable uses, once that's determined, you are going to be reporting it in CARS. So as Susie and I shared earlier, CARS is the Consolidated Application Reporting System. That's probably usually the same person that you'll need to contact when you start having these conversations. So typically it's your Title I director or state and federal program director, whatever title they hold, the same person that you should be having that one-on-one conversation with if you're the liaison and the person who's doing the reporting. So as Susie shared before, CARS is a two-part application. So there's a winter and a spring. The winter release is from mid-January to the end of February, right around now. And the spring release is from mid-May to the end of June annually. So in the winter release, right around now, LEAs are reporting their set-aside amount. So on the page that's titled Title I Part A Allocation and Reservations, there's a page specific for homeless, and your district has already made a determination on this set aside. So it's important for you, if you're a liaison, to know how much of that reservation amount is, how it was determined, if you were a part of that conversation. And then in the next slide,
Carmina,
yes.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just been going through the questions and I wanted to pause really quick because there's there's a question in the Q of A. I just thought you could answer live. It's going back to use of funds.
Yes.
There's a question about prom tickets.
Yes. Do you want to answer that? Because it is on the prohibited slide.
Mhm.
So you had a
So
really great analogy because you actually work with students in schools on this. So
yeah, so what I usually advise LEAs around prom tickets is this. Couple of things. Prom the price that you pay for a prom ticket is generally funds that go to the ASB. They're raising money by selling the prom tickets. So it's very um, easy for a school to or an ASB club to decide to waive the price for a student experiencing homelessness if they want to. Or you can if your ASB doesn't want to waive the price of the ticket for certain students, um, which should be handled discreetly with the club and the price of the ticket or the faculty advisor and the price of the ticket. You can reach out to your PTA to see if they want to cover the cost for students to go to prom, or other local groups who may be willing to give funds for that. Um, and then Carmina, there were a couple other use of funds. Sports uniforms.
in Q&A, I did see that. Yeah. And I think things like sports uniforms falls very similarly under what Susie just shared. Um, I think we forget how much fellow staff and community members really want to help our students who are experiencing homelessness, and that if this is really truly a burden for those students, that there's a way to cover that. Um,
There's also some questions about grad
Grad
night
night. Yeah.
tickets.
So you have to remember that, like we said earlier in the allowable uses, this is regarding the um, academic access and success of the student. So um, things like senior activities or grad night tickets does not directly contribute to the educational outcomes of that student. So those would not be allowable uses. Again, going back to Susie's example for um, um, what was it? Your making sure to reach out to community members, fellow ASB presidents, or other students who are part of the student body, making sure that they are being able to participate on these different activities. Maybe there's like a family or a community agency who wants to support students in this. Um, let's see, what else? Great suggestion. You can always reach out to community service clubs, Kiwanis Club, and you're correct, faith-based organizations, community organizations. Thank you, Bill Morrow, for that one.
The last
Carla?
one is about asking for medical, dental, eyeglass, hearing aid funds. This is a question that I get a lot as a COE liaison. This is actually internal. You need to identify if you're not the liaison, talk to the homeless liaison at your LEA. If you are the liaison, talk to your Title I coordinator about because the funds for those things come out of the set aside amount or the reservation amount. So did your Title I coordinator reserve enough funds for you to get that done? And then they can direct you on accessing funds for that or how to go about it. That's a sort of internal process at each LEA.
Perfect. And then I did see another question in the Q&A. So if a family uses their vehicle to bring their child to school, we are allowed to use the funds for car repairs, right? Um, Not for Title I Part A. So school of origin and transportation, um, it would the transportation supports is only for school of origin. And you want to be careful and have, internal policies in those conversations regarding what will support that student. So being careful that if this is what you offer one parent, it's going to be open to all parents. So you want to be careful in making sure that, if your typical type of support for transportation is bus passes, then that's what you offer everybody. If it's rerouting a bus or something like that, then that's what's going to be helpful. Car repairs is not typically allowable or part of the Title I Part A reservation. Gas cards and vouchers is also not a part of the Title I Part A reservation. I want to make sure that when we're talking today, we may have some liaisons who are EHCY grantees, and those funds are very different from the federal Title I Part A reservation, which is why we wanted to make sure we went through the allowable uses. So making sure that, I know many of you wear multiple hats, that you're wearing your hat as a homeless liaison and talking about the Title I Part A reservation funds. But happy to have that discussion in more detail. If one-on-one or with your county office or your district. So Susie, I know adding yourself to the listserv through the Homeless Ed CDE general email box, but you can also use that email to connect with us one-on-one. So thank you for doing that, Susie. I think we got through a lot of those questions. If there's anything else, we'll probably come right back to it.
Yeah, I think, sorry, you
Okay,
can
good.
go back
Oh, no, you're fine.
here.
That's good. I know those were like adding up in there, and I wasn't sure if I missed something. Okay. So, somebody put a great question and maybe a tip. Is there a template or a sample letter that can be used to request donations from community organizations or some of these items that are not allowable uses under Title I? Is that something we can find on the HETAC website? Well, not yet, right? So great question. I'm sure, going back to Susie's point, make sure you reach out to your county office. A lot of our county office of education homeless coordinators are real true veterans. If they can't answer it, they for sure know the district who has done something that like you're probably looking for and can refer you to somebody who has done that, or maybe the direct agency that they've used in your neighboring district or community area that can help with that, or a county office that knows exactly who to reach out to get that service or support for these students. So regarding the reporting, I won't go into the spring release. So because this has already kind of gone and passed, but this is what is required from you all on your spring release in CARS. Again, the two-part reporting system. In the next slide, oh, sorry, can we go back one, Denise? So in the spring, there is all of these bullets, these open bullets. So we do ask about your homeless liaison contact information, what the FTE, so full-time equivalent of that position, because as I just shared, some of you wear multiple hats. The Title I Part A set aside expended amount. So you may reserve a particular amount and then maybe expended more than that. As we said earlier, maybe there was a natural disaster or something that happened, a big change. So what was reserved in the beginning and what was actually expended may be different. And then, of course, the activities that were provided because of these funds. So what was it that your district did for that? Now we can go to the next slide. We do ask about the Homeless Education Board policy approval date. So this is the initial date that if you've made changes and updates to your board policy, there's no need to change that date in CARS. I know that's confusing sometimes. We do ask about training participation by various stakeholders. So we will ask, did you, the liaison, receive training? Maybe you attended today. And so you should document the fact that you've attended today, talking about some of the different homeless education responsibilities. Did you use today's training to train others? So have you used this training or other training that you've attended to share the definition of homeless? So we do ask, have you trained teachers, principals, other leadership staff within your district, et cetera. So we do ask about specific stakeholders and different staff within personnel within your district and who's been trained. We also ask about the housing questionnaire. There is a requirement regarding the use of a housing questionnaire. We have the full recording and training on our HETAC website for that as well. Poster dissemination. There is a California You Can Enroll in School poster that has the rights protections and contact information that should be posted in all kinds of areas that it's accessible for both families and children and youth. So all of those things that are listed and that are reported in your spring CARS pages is data that is used for your risk assessment for FPMs as well. There is a link to the CARS page that talks in more detail about this and what it goes into when you're filling it out and reporting. On the next couple of slides, there is a release, kind of a table of what's populated, when, at what times. So you'll see the Title I Part A LEA allocation, that's pre-populated. The reservation amount that you decided is also pre-populated from your winter reporting. So, and this is what you'll input in the next parts. Then we go into evaluation, unless there's questions specifically about CARS. Okay, do see a question from Alice. In CARS winter release, is the LEA reporting this current school year set aside amount or the amount planned for next fiscal year?
In the winter, it's the amount that it's not the next year, but you're reporting for that school year
Current.
what you set aside. So you maybe haven't spent it all yet because the winter release is earlier, but you're reporting for the current year.
What is the question asked on the poster dissemination? Is it a yes or no? Oh, good question, Jeannie. I cannot remember off the top of my head. Sorry about that. You'll have to email me. I can't remember that off the top of my head right now. So in the next slide,
Alice asked about, in reality, when does an LEA typically determine the set aside amount? Do they really decide the budget during the summer? I think that varies.
yeah.
I think it varies locally depending on your LEA, but one of this next slide is actually one of my slides, and it talks about evaluating your set aside amount and what you were able to do with it. And the recommendation is that there is a conversation annually. So in my mind, it would be best to be having that conversation at the end of the year, so that going into the new year, you've sort of now taken time to evaluate. Did we set aside the amount? Did we set aside the right amount? Were we using the funds strategically? Were we able to get the services for our students that we wanted to? That sort of plays into um, what then will be decided upon for the coming year when the liaison and the Title I coordinator meet to collaborate on that. So what we're saying on this slide is that, the recommendation is that you evaluate how your year went. Um, did you have sufficient funds set aside? But also just kind of discussing the ongoing needs of your homeless students and what are emerging needs. Are there new things coming up that your homeless students are going to have? Talking about the effectiveness of where you spent your money or your time in that manner. And then evaluating current, oh, I think this might be on the next slide. Sorry. Next slide, Denise. Um, are you looking at academic outcomes and other outcomes for homeless students to non-homeless students? I think that we've heard a bunch of times um, from the research that there's risk associated with homelessness above and beyond poverty that needs to be addressed. So, are you seeing achievement gaps even comparing your homeless students to your non-homeless Title I students? Are you utilizing the dashboard? Um, Asking about if the homeless liaison had been a part of the discussion regarding the amount um, set aside and the activities of that. I know in my county, I get a lot of feedback from liaisons that they aren't really involved or as involved in that determination as they would like to be. And just strategizing ways to get them into that conversation. One of those ways is obviously utilizing what it says in statute about that. Um, and then looking at the per pupil amount of the set aside to the number of homeless students enrolled and dividing the amount of the set aside spent by the number of the homeless enrollment. In other words, like looking at how much you're spending per pupil. Also looking at if you didn't spend all of your set aside, why? Like what else could you have done? Basically, just doing a post analysis of how the year went in terms of funding and serving your students experiencing homelessness. Next slide. In this slide, we just have some resources for you to look at the CDE Title I Part A Reservation Funds document that Carmina mentioned earlier. There's a link here. There's also a link to the brand new HETAC Title I Part A resources. The National Center for Homeless Ed Title I Part A resource page is also a really good resource. And Schoolhouse Connection has a also relatively new resource on maximizing the Title I set aside for homeless students. On their website, there's tons to dig into on that one as well. And I think the next slide, we get into sort of our frequently asked questions. We have kind of a poll, although we're not using Zoom polling. But we're going to go through some of these and invite all of you to go ahead and like answer in the chat what you think the answer to the question is. I'm going to read the question. You guys feel free to share in the chat what you think, and then Carmina's going to answer it. So the first question is, can LEAs use Title I set aside funds to pay for the homeless liaison position? You guys let us know what you think.
Nice. We can see who's on
Oh,
it right now.
yeah, we got a variety of no's and yeses.
Yes.
Um, so let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
So the answer is yes. Title I Part A homeless reservation funds can be used to fund all or part of the homeless liaison salary. Um, if that person has no Title I duties, of course. So if they have no Title I duties, it could be 100% paid out of the reservation. For some of you who said no, maybe you had your EHCY hat on. So I also want to add that in larger LEAs with significant numbers of identified students who are experiencing homelessness that are enrolled, it's also allowable for the use of Title I funds to support that additional staff to carry out those liaison duties.
Carmina, there's a question about what you would define as larger LEA and what is significant number of students.
Oh man, we're getting really technical. Let's see. I'm not sure that we have definitions for larger and significant. I think it even a large district may have a number of students experiencing homelessness that is the same number as a more medium district. Um, I'm happy to have that conversation one-on-one, Michaela, if you think that you fall under that category, possibly. We do have a lot of districts who do set aside the Title I funds that are not part of that homeless reservation to support the role, especially like a lot of our districts who are doing community schools or who have some of the shared responsibilities for students. So like in the beginning when we were talking about the federal definition and requirements under Title I for academic success and that access, which I think goes to Ms. Otham's question as well. If we have, or I mean, Miriam's question, explaining more about Title I duties. So I'm not a Title I expert. I'm a homeless education expert around Title I reservation for homeless, so I can share those duties, but there is a responsibility and a shared duty, kind of like what we talked about at the beginning of our presentation, between the responsibilities under Title I and the responsibilities of that homeless liaison and the LEA overall regarding homelessness.
I
Susie,
think
did you want to add? Yeah.
I was just going to say, in terms of like larger LEAs with significant numbers, I think one thing is that that's where we tend to see it more often. But also, you can think about what Carmina said earlier, that you can use your reservation funds for people who support the liaison position. Like she gave an example of a data person. This is sort of the same idea that in some LEAs, I would say more commonly larger ones, they are using the funds to also fund positions that support the liaison work, if that maybe is a simpler way to say it. Okay, next slide. So the next question is there a required amount that has to be set aside each year? So we'll go ahead and let you guys, this is also a yes or no question. Tell us what you think. We got a couple no's, and a yes. Denise, next slide.
So the answer is no. There's not a required amount. There's no set amount that needs to be reserved. There is a requirement to make a reservation every year, but there's not an amount that is required. So it's important that the LEA, hopefully you got this from our entire presentation from both Susie and I today, that it is important that the LEA determine the amount based on the needs of those students that are enrolled and some other local factors. So transportation, natural disasters, supporting for academic needs, loss of, academic support, those kinds of things. Also, the reservation funds are a part of the federal monitoring review. And so you should make sure that it's supporting the academic access and success of those students. So that whole idea as we've presented all day, that making sure that there's that relationship regarding what's going to bring, that academic success for those students.
Okay,
Awesome,
next
awesome.
slide.
I feel like that last one was kind of tricky. That's why we got the yeses and nos, because there is a required reservation, but not a required amount.
Amount,
So
that's right.
maybe
Uh,
we're a little sneaky. Don't feel
this,
bad if you answered yes.
this question is, can you use Title I Part A funds to pay for caps and gowns for graduation?
Ooh, tricky, tricky. Yeah, Jose, you better get this one because you were asking a lot of good questions, huh?
Okay,
Nice.
we got a lot of answers rolling in for this one. Let's go to the next slide.
So the answer is yes. Yes, because we're talking about caps and gowns for graduation. So I know we talked a lot about a lot of different types of activities and things going on around graduation for some of our students who are graduating. But caps and gowns is different. This is a ceremony and event that the student worked their entire high school education for, and it's a part of their I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, so jump in, Susie, if you want. But it's part of their academic success. It's part of
Yeah.
something that they worked for. It's part of participating with the entire class. So, like they would in an educational field trip or that kind of a event. So, caps and gowns to be able to participate fully with their peers, yes, is very different than, say, like a senior trip or those kinds of things, which is not allowable.
And I just want to, since we're on the topic right now and we're not super short on time, I just want to add on this topic because we did have a lot of conversation about it during the use of funds conversation as well. Those other activities that are not an allowable use of your Title I Part A reservation funds, that conversation I just want to say is strictly an allowable use of funds conversation, not a commentary on like those activities being any less important.
Correct.
I truly believe in a lot of the liaisons that I work with have created a lot of alternative ways to get those things for their students and to make sure that they can participate in those activities. This is strictly around like these particular funds can't be used for that. But those activities are in no way any less important for students. So I just want to acknowledge that. Um,
Absolutely.
Next slide. I think this is our
So,
last poll question. So
mhm.
what, and we didn't talk about this a lot today. So let's see. What if we do not have any identified homeless students? Do we still have to reserve Title I Part A funds? What do you guys think? Yes or no? Wow, d- pretty
Love
unified
Michaela's
responses on this one.
comment. You
Doing
need
good.
to find them. Yes, they
That's a
are
good one. They are
there.
there.
Beautiful.
Okay. We got a lot of good responses on that one.
Mhm.
Do you want to go to the next slide and we'll let Carmina answer?
Yes, so echoing Michaela here. Yes, they're there. You got to find them. So remember when we talked through the allowable uses of funds, um, those students are there. Um, if you are receiving Title I funds, it's because you have students who have a particular need. And the reservation funds are still required regardless of identification. So there is a requirement to make that reservation. Those funds can support that work to identify those students. And that's just the beginning. The identification is the very beginning of your actual work as a district. Another good reason to reserve those funds would be to have that reservation um, to support students during fires, pandemics, floods, all of those different things, because students who are displaced are considered homeless and should be identified as such by the homeless liaison. So as Michaela said, they're there. So, and they need to be identified. I'm going to just probably quote you forever now, Michaela. They're there. Yes.
Well, thank you everyone for playing our little frequently asked questions game. I think it brings us to the end, unless there are additional questions that anyone wants to quickly type into the chat. We can, do you want to put the eval link? Oh, there it is.
So if you could please take a moment to scan the QR code or use the link that Denise put into the chat to provide feedback. We would love to hear from you and what you thought for today's presentation, what you need more of. Um, and yes, we also are very excited for the conference next month.
Yes. Thank you everyone for joining us.